on to what promises to be a very exciting evening. I see we have four excellent musicians, well, three and Gordon. It only took me 10 seconds to start kidding Gordon. So we have this is a real treat. And I see some other people brought their instruments, so a jam session might break out here. This might be the first ever jam session in Library 101, and we'll make it a weekly occurrence. So we have Dr. Howard Wight Marshall is here tonight, and he's a native of Moberly, Missouri, and he comes from a long line of musicians. He's a Marine Corps veteran. I believe today is the anniversary of the founding of the Marine Corps. So
thank you.
Congratulations. He's a graduate of the University of Missouri at Columbia. He earned his doctorate at Indiana University. Before coming back to Missouri in 1982, he was a research director at Conner Prairie Pioneer Settlement, which is an open-air museum in Indiana. He was the director of the Country Music Hall of Fame. He was a consultant for the Smithsonian. He worked at the Library of Congress for 5 years, and he taught at Kansas State University. He now is proudly and happily a professor emeritus of art history and archaeology at the University of Missouri Columbia. He's also the former director of the Missouri Cultural Heritage Center at Mizzou. He's published a number of books and articles on grassroots history, vernacular architecture, folk music, and cultural heritage, including, which I think is one of my favorite titles, Play Me Something Quick and Devilish, which is available for sale after this event. Old Time Fiddlers in Missouri, and Fiddler's Dream, Old Time Swing and Bluegrass Fiddling in the 20th-Century Missouri, which I'm currently reading. I told him this. I'm reading it to review it for Ozarks Watch Magazine, the next issue of Ozarks Watch Magazine, and he's going to get a glowing review. I told him all that. So, very interesting book. Rumor has it he's working on a third book, which will bring the saga of fiddling in Missouri up to the present day. Gordon McCann was born in Joplin. We won't hold that against him, but he's always lived in Springfield. As a boy, he enjoyed listening to different kinds of music, including the big band music and country music, and he especially remembers listening to radio station KWTO, keep watching the Ozarks, AM 560, that featured country artists playing live. He also enjoyed floating in john boats on the region's rivers. One of the activities led him to develop a deep love for the Ozarks. In 1930, his father started a blueprinting business, which he took over and became very successful at, Springfield Blueprint and Photocopy Company, which is still in business. Graduated from Springfield Senior High in 1949, married Mona in 1952, and he graduated from SNS in 1954. In the mid-70s, he devoted more time to his personal interest in regional history, folklore, and most of all music, and he's developed a large personal library of maps, books, manuscripts, and recordings. He met such luminaries as Vance Randolph, Max Hunter, and many more. It was at a weekly jam session down in Ozark that he met the fiddler Art Galbraith, who died in '93, and they performed professionally for 17 years. Gordon co-authored with Vance Randolph Volume 2 of Ozark Folklore and Annotated Bibliography, which is published in '87. He and Art, as I mentioned, performed locally and nationally at places like the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, the San Diego Folk Festival, the 1984 World's Fair, the National Folk Festival at Wolf Trap, and many locations around the Midwest. They've done a couple of albums together, which were put out by Roundel Records. He retired in 1996, 21 years ago, and he became deeply involved in projects related to Ozarks folklore. He co-produced 6-rounder CDs about traditional Ozarks fiddle music, and in 2008 he co-authored with Drew Beiswanger, who used to be a faculty member here at the MSU Libraries, a book titled Ozarks Fiddle Music. He is the genius behind the Gordon McCann Ozarks Folk Music Collection. If you had not had a chance to do that, I know Eddie Waterworth in the audience here has been working on that. It's online on our YouTube channel. So if you go to our website and click through on the little YouTube icon, you will waste a pretty good month just listening to all the recordings that are already up there. We're not even finished yet. We've got a ways to go. He has an honorary doctorate from MSU 2010. And last but not least, he and Cheryl Burnett introduced me to the McClurg Jam Session on Monday nights, for which I am eternally grateful. Luke Cormier is a native of Springfield, Missouri. He was taught music at a young age and gravitated, as many boys do, towards the drums, playing and studying various styles. A few years ago, he realized that his real calling was fiddling because his great-grandfather was Art Galbraith. So we've got a long line here. And he continues to play today. He's going to play for us tonight. Last but not least, Heinrich Leonhard is a native of Tübingen, Germany, and he was raised in Missouri, first in St. Louis and then in Columbia. Like myself, he's the third of 4 boys, but unlike me, he was highly creative, imaginative, and an active child. He received his BS in geology from the University of Missouri, but spent most of his college years painting watercolors and playing old-time music on his Martin guitar. He excelled at both and developed deep love of geology and regularly explores the countryside collecting rocks, as anyone who looks at his garden can see. After college, Heinrich worked at several archaeological digs across North America and Europe, and then he returned to Missouri, married his wife, Amy, in 1982, and began to collaborate with his mother on what would become Tannenbaum Ceramics. Heinrich and his wife Amy has collaborated together on several projects, including 3 children and 2 sets of tableware. Heinrich was featured in Women's World magazine for his cowbell piece, and he has won numerous awards over the years in different arts.
It's all coming back to me now.
So I'll turn it over to Dr. Marshall, and we're in for a treat.
Thank you, Dr. Beal. I don't know where you got that stuff. Most of it's true. Hello, everyone. We're just going to start in and play a tune and kind of loosen up a little bit, and then we'll talk. And if you know this tune, that means you were raised around fiddlers. The title is Red Wing. Great to be in Springfield, and SMS used to be one of those places that students from St. Louis didn't really go to too often. And I'm sorry to say that Mizzou has, I think for the first time, lost most of its St. Louis students to Missouri State University. Long story, but congratulations, Springfield, for grabbing all those well-off St. Louis college students that we used to have in Columbia. Maybe we'll get them back someday for grad school or something. Really nice to be here. I have a lot of friends around Springfield and spent many a nice evening here many years ago playing music in Art Galbraith's kitchen. And so really tonight, we're kind of going to celebrate Art Galbraith, and we're going to celebrate Lonnie Robertson, the great fiddle player who I think is perhaps maybe the best known fiddler to come from this part of Missouri, on a sort of international scale because of all of his recordings, his radio programs, and his outgoing personality too, and his business lady wife who is very good at selling records while Lonnie just pretty much chew tobacco and play tunes. Another good reason for celebrating tonight is that I happen to see many members of the Gordon McCann fan club here. It's always nice to be at a meeting of the Gordon McCann fan club, of which I, by the way, am a Callaway County president, in case anybody wants to join after the show. The admission price is very low, just the cost of a couple of books. Well, we're here to talk about a new book that's just come out. That's the one with the violin on the cover. That's this violin called Fiddler's Dream. In order to make sense of the program, which I usually try to kind of walk you through some of the themes in these books, I need first to talk about the first book in the trilogy, which is this little fatty here with the great quote on the cover. And that one came out several years ago, and I conceived of the project as a kind of rough chronology of the main themes and the main people who make Missouri music, beginning with those French fiddlers and dancers in the old St. Genevieve district south of St. Louis, of which there are still some there still playing that music. So I kind of go from that moment of early European settlement up through various themes. In the first book, I stumbled on some themes I hadn't really much thought about until I started writing the book, such as the amazing number of old-time fiddlers in Missouri who have Native American ancestry, and Cherokee being the leading tribe, and there are probably 15 fiddlers in the Springfield area with Native American heritage, all due to the Trail of Tears, et cetera, et cetera. And I talk about, I have a whole chapter on Native American fiddlers, which is kind of tough to discuss. And more tough than that is talking about black fiddlers in Missouri, of which we have had many, 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 as you can imagine, most of whom are forgotten in the annals of the history books. But so I made an extra effort to do some archaeology and figure out who these African American fiddlers were, and also suggest some things about their incredible importance in the late 1920s over WOS radio, when these black guys were playing, you know, Irish jigs and British hoedowns over the radio. Nobody knew they were black. And people learned these tunes as far away as Cuba and Hawaii because of AM radio's immense wattage and reach. So those are the kinds of themes that really interest me. And of course we have, you know, mostly Scotch-Irish people in this part of the state, so that's kind of me. Although I have to admit I did the Ancestry.com thing. Y'all done that? Shock! You know, I'm 38% Irish, so I thought I'd better wear this tie tonight. I often thought it was maybe 15%, you know, but boy, you can't escape Ancestry.com's genetic analysis. Well, anyhow, so there's a chapter on music during the Civil War, of course, a big theme that a lot of people write about and is interesting to many people. Post-war railroad building, which is terribly important in Missouri, and in my part of north central Missouri, of course, the railroads built towns like the town where I grew up, from Moberly, a railroad town, and those railroads were built in north Missouri substantially by people who survived the Civil War, and quite often Confederate, former Confederate Army members who had nothing to go home to. And then add to that Irish immigrants about the same time. And you have a pretty interesting mix of fiddle music in those little railroad towns in far north Missouri that was not, I think, the experience here in this part of the Ozarks. So I'm very interested in that theme also. I also got off on such things as the brass band movement that started during the Civil War and sort of culminated with John Philip Sousa and the Marine Band and all that. Around 1900, and all the tunes that we play that turn out to be brass band compositions from band leaders in those days. And then that led me to thinking about those horns that these people played, many of them brought in by German-speaking immigrants in the 19th century, that those horns are put in keys like B flat and F. And I've come to appreciate the importance of mixing with band musicians playing horns for getting fiddle players over into the flat keys of B flat and E flat less, But in Central Missouri, we play a lot of stuff in F and B flat. I think that's one of the reasons. We don't hear that much in the Ozarks in B flat and F. Anyway, so I get into some of these nuances, trying to figure out who made the music and where the music comes from. And I kind of try to wind this story down in the 1920s, in the jazz age. When my mother was a teenager and a flapper, and that's one of those decades where tremendous things were changing throughout society, economy, world affairs, and really in music. Ragtime comes into its own. You start to get real early swing and big band stuff, and it's one of those big decades in American history, the 1920s, which of course comes crashing down, after the crash, 1929, the stock market crash. So I end that book there in the new book, which is called Fiddler's Dream. Yes, that's the title of a fiddle tune. Is trying to pick up the threads in the 1920s and then bring it down to the early 1960s. That sounds like a real brief set of decades, but actually if you think about what's going on in those decades, man, there's a lot going on like there was in the 1920s. And so I talk about things that one couldn't talk about till 1930 or so, such as swing fiddling, which I love, and bluegrass, which happens in November 1945, or whatever date you put on it, when Earl and Bill played on the Grand Ole Opry, whatever your favorite date is for that. And probably around 1945, and it helped me appreciate how important bluegrass music is in Missouri. It isn't nearly as important in most states west of here particularly, but how very important it is and how Missouri helped launch bluegrass. Bill Monroe told me in 1974 that Missouri really helped launch bluegrass because it was the first state where his first hit record really sold well. That record was Gil Skinner Blues, first really big hit record, and sold best in Missouri and kind of helped spread it around. And of course, Monroe visited Missouri many times and knew a lot of people in Missouri, and would stay here after he had a concert, stay for weeks and go fox hunting and buy cattle and make trouble, and just quite an interesting story. So there's a lot about bluegrass in the new book. So just tonight I want to just hit a few themes that we talked about mostly in the second book, and maybe reach back into the first book, and then we'll get Luke to play a couple of his great-grandfather's tunes, and knowing Gordon, Dr. McCann, excuse me, will enlighten us, I'm sure, as soon as the light comes on back of the room. When he sees that red light, he'll start a narrative that will correct probably everything I've said up to that point. I've known Gordon for many years, and I love the way and I quote him many times in my book, so check it out. He is Mr. Music in this part of the world, and I respect him tremendously. So proud that I could entice him to come in tonight. Thank you, Gordon. Well, okay, that was Red Wing. I always like to play that when I do much of any kind of program. It was my grandfather and grandmother's favorite dance tune. He was the big fiddler in my family when I was a little kid, and my grandmother played piano behind him, and they played endlessly for Saturday night dances, and played in church together for 51 years, I believe it was. Pretty incredible. You'd think he'd have something better to do than to go to church every Sunday for 50 years. Who could do that? Well, maybe a Baptist in Springfield, I don't know. Where I'm from, that's pretty rare, Central Missouri. It's kind of like the Berkeley of Missouri, Columbia. I guess I'll play a tune called Leather Britches. I like to play this in memory of Art Galbraith, who was one of the fiddlers who first really inspired me to understand fiddling in its deeper levels. And he was, as many of you know, quite a scholar, and of course Margaret too. Both of them were really scholarly people and knew the history of the stuff upside and down. Margaret would send me news clippings from the newspapers with everything about, it sound familiar to some of you? Newspaper clippings, so I'd be sure I knew about such and such thing for years. And this is a tune I really like the way Art Galbraith played it. Don't pretend to play like Art Galbraith in his style, but remember him well, and I like to play this tune called Leather Britches, which is one of his favorite tunes. As far as I know, Mark, you could correct me on that. I think thank you. Looking around at Galbraith family, see if I'm on the ball here about this. He played it in a very gentle way. I play a little more Central Missouri, a little more vigorously. But it's one of those tunes that I like to point out that has a really old heritage. We often talk about tunes that fiddlers play as being old Irish melodies and all this stuff. Sometimes that's true. Most of those tunes really come from Scotland. Sorry, but it's true. Leather Britches is one of those that comes from ancient Scotland and England and then filtered through into the colonies. But it represents a tune that I call an earwig, or perhaps an ironclad tune. That for musicians, once you hear it a few times, you can never forget it. Like Happy Birthday, those melodies that somehow they get in. Red Wings kind of like that. Once you've heard that tune, you'll never forget it. And I hope I play it in such a way that you can remember it when I play it, but this is the tune, Leather Britches, which has a lot of possible meanings. We'll save that for the footnotes and the professors to argue about later what Leather Britches really refers to. Use your own imagination. Thank you. You've noticed Luke Cormier sitting here. This is the young man to my immediate right. He said, I'm not going to play along with all of those tunes with you because I play them so much better than you do. That would honest to God, this kid can play. We're going to let you hear him in just a second. He's not here just for window dressing, although he's a nice enough looking young man, don't you think? What do you think, Mark? Did all right. I think he'll do. Another thing I talk about in the book is all of the tunes that we have from what you might call Tin Pan Alley. Of course, Red Wing is one of those. It's a composed tune. Another thing that we imagine about fiddling is that it all comes from the ancient Moors, bubbled out of the goo, somehow dancing around the fire and wearing bear skins and playing the fiddle. But no, actually, I've found in my own research that Gordon probably backed this up, that probably the majority of tunes that everybody loves are composed by somebody somewhere, and in many cases on Tin Pan Alley from about 1860 to 1940. And it's quite interesting that those tunes are no longer considered composed tunes by so-and-so author, but they percolated so well into our imaginations in our souls that they just are taken to be everybody's music. I like that, but I'm sure music publishers wish it were otherwise. This is one of those tunes that most fiddlers I know in my part of the state play, I call it the Rose of Sharon. It's a waltz because I learned it from a record by the great Nashville fiddler Howdy Forrester, who I admired when I was Luke's age and tried like everything to play like Howdy Forrester. Soon gave it up, of course. Just tried to play like me eventually. But this is one of those tunes composed, in this case, by a famous Scottish author named James Scott Skinner, who was really an illustrious violinist and Highland step dancer who would put on his clan stuff and put on shows in big halls in Edinburgh and London, and was famous for many of his compositions. I think he published something like 650, does that sound right? 650 different tunes. There are about 3 of them that fiddlers play, don't realize. They were composed by James Scott Skinner. This is one of those, composed in 1920. It's another one of those tunes that has a lot of different titles. If you're into fiddling, I'm sure you enjoy, as I do, all the crazy titles that fiddlers use for tunes, that sometimes the original title is lost. Well, I did find the original music to this, and it's not called Rose of Sharon, it's called Rosebud of Allan Vale, which is a village in Scotland. And for years, I doing research, I kind of worked through different titles, and in the 1990s, I thought it was called Rosebuds of Aviemore. And sure enough, I've been in Aviemore. It's a stop on the train from Glasgow to Inverness. So if you go to Inverness, you get off at Aviemore and get your picture taken with your fiddle by the sign that says Aviemore. And you get home and you tell all your buddies, hey, I played Rosebuds of Aviemore in Aviemore. And they laugh and say, well, that's not really the title, I'm sorry. I guess my favorite title is one that I have actually heard in fiddle contests, Rosebuds of Nevermore. Some people call it Rosebuds of Evermore. It just goes on and on and on. But Rosebuds of Nevermore, somehow that's my favorite funny title. But anyway, here's the waltz. A Scottish tune. What do you think?
What?
Yeah. Are we worn out yet? You haven't done anything. I'm the one that should be tired. Well, we're going to ask Luke to play a couple of tunes, and I really don't like putting young people on the spot, but you know it kind of builds character. Remember that? Your mom always said, builds character, Rusty. That was my name when I was his age, Rusty. Builds character. But he doesn't need, he's got plenty of character already. I'll just let you talk a while and play a couple of tunes of our Galbraith.
Thanks.
I'm talking to that.
Yes, good.
So those are a few songs I learned off of Gordon and my great-grandfather's record. And Rocky Mountain Hornpipe was what I got from Howard's book, is a tune that was brought down from by way of Tennessee by my great-great-great-great-grandfather, Andrew Galbraith, who is a dancing master, which you can ask Howard what that means. And he brought this tune, and it's called Rocky Mountain Hornpipe, or Old Rocky Mountain, and I'm going to play it for you.
Want some more?
I guess. So the next one we'll play is called Flowers at Edinburgh, and there's a long history behind that song anyway, but then there's a long familial history from my family, and basically it's the gist of, we play it differently, or historically differently, and it's one that my great-grandfather learned from my first cousin, 3 times removed, Clay Galbraith. And it's called Flowers Edinburgh. It's just an old British Isles tune from Scotland again, and Howard goes into much depth about the nuances of the song in his first book, Playing Something Quick and Devilish. And basically it's a crooked tune, that it's got the Scotch catch in it, or the old extra beat, and basically it just doesn't count out like a normal song would. It's not square, it's odd. Yeah. So we'll play Flowers at Edinburgh now.
Yeah, now here,
Oh, go ahead, Gordon.
put it in here a little bit. That was, well, he learned that when he said that was the oldest tune he thought he knew. That your great, he was a veteran of the War of 1812.
Right.
And he was a dance master, and that was the tune also came down the family from him.
From Andrew.
Yeah.
Okay.
He'd be proud of you, I'll tell you that. So far.
Ready, Heinrich? Following you. Yeah, go ahead. very difficult song to second. You can ask Heinrich.
I tried.
Gordon's about the only one who can do it historically and otherwise. So
Historically.
yeah.
Okay, you notice, I don't know whether the people all agree with it, but he uses about this much of his bow. And his great-grandfather did that too. And Lonnie Robertson didn't use a long bow, he used a short bow. Emmanuel Wood used it. And Emmanuel Wood had a little toy bow he had made about this long, he'd play tunes with it. But they're short bow players. They're not long bow.
Yeah.
Most of them in Central Missouri are longer.
Yeah.
In Waltz's they'll use more because they have to get that long stuff going out, you know.
Well, Howard showed me how to play with a long bow, and then Gordon scolded me for it.
Yeah. Thanks, Gordon. You need to
Talk
come.
more than your great-grandfather did. That's what he liked. He'd play and I talk. That's what he liked. And you're talking more now.
That's right. Where do you get that part of it? Yeah, that Flowers of Edinburgh is a tune that, it's one of those tunes that just went into my mind immediately. First time I heard it, I guess, was April 1967 from Art Galbraith. And it just, I remember it ever since and recorded it a number of times. And we do have there's a recording of Art playing it in 1968 in this book with a guitar player named Michael Bride, who now lives in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. See, I know how to talk. But it's a nice setting, and I encourage you musicians, whatever you play, to give that tune a listen. I know that extra beat drives a lot of people crazy. There are parts of the world where people admire those extra beats and crooked tunes. Those places are mostly in southern Appalachia. I usually don't like tunes like that, but you know, because I'm sort of a four-square guy, you know, Methodist. But when Art played that, all those extra things, and it just thrilled me. And when he talked about the Scotch catch, I remember that I'm Scotch-Irish. And just thrilled me, and it's one of those great moments in my life when I heard him play that tune. Never forgot it. Nice job, Luke. Yeah, keep going. I mentioned ragtime, and I suppose I ought to play a ragtime tune. I'm no great shakes at playing ragtime or much of anything else, but we'll play a tune that is very popular among fiddlers, probably thanks to fiddling Arthur Smith, who was a big player on the Grand Ole Opry in the late 1930s, made a lot of records, and others copied his style. He's sort of the proto-bluegrass fiddler because he was playing a lot of the stuff later, before there was something called bluegrass, before it was invented. But I found out in some of my, the archaeology I do, and it's really like archaeology, peeling back all the layers, not only of archives and old recordings, but people's memories. If people remember Wade Ray, anybody ever heard of Wade Ray, a fiddler in the St. Louis area, from Illinois actually, who played on KMOX AM back in the 50s, and played this tune, and people who knew Wade would say that Wade Ray taught Peacock Rag to Arthur Smith. I can't prove that, but I like this story, and I'm staying with it. We'll play a little Peacock Rag. hesitant to try because people like Gordon McCann will say, "You playing that all wrong." But I'm going to take that chance because I get to leave and go back to the safety of North Missouri after this is over. You know, where people are sane and talk straight and know how to vote and all that stuff. I feel, I'm kind of here on a visa, and they stamp that when you get down about Eldon. There's a little place to pull in. They give you a stamp. There's a stamp on your wrist. Go ahead, but be sure you come back today. No staying overnight. So this is called, what's this called? Kansas City Kitty. And that doesn't have any other titles as far as I know. This is a swing tune that in recent years a lot of fiddlers have started to play. As fiddle contests have started to go a little crazy, more and more Texas stuff is being, created and kind of covering over old-time Missouri fiddling. This is one of the tunes that you hear as a tune of choice in contests now that I never heard when I was in younger years. But I like swing and like to try to play a tune once in a while. And I play this in honor of the Nixa Flash, Zed Tennis. Doc Peters over here, about the only person in the room besides me who's a Zed Tennis fan. Are there any other Zed Tennis fans here? It's not a brand of shoe or anything. This guy was a swing fiddler and a jazz fiddler par excellence, and he was way ahead of his time. Played on KWTO with the Hayden family, back in the glory days of AM radio in the 30s and 40s. Toured all over the country, and I guess Dr. Peters is preparing to write some articles, I guess maybe a book that will include some material on Zed Tennis. I can't wait to have that book because he's always fascinated me. He's one of those fiddlers that, he's from Nixa, he grew up here, but he was one of those who caught the swing bug and the jazz bug early, and a lot of old-time fiddlers play a little bit of swing, but he just went for it and played some amazing stuff. And so I'll try a little Kansas City Kitty in honor of the ghost of Zed Tennis. He died poor in a veterans hospital, with no recognition, so far as I can tell, in his own community, or very little, as I understand it.
There's a street name for him down there.
There's a street name for him?
Yeah.
Send me a photo of that, will you, on email, please? I'd love to have that.
People may not understand it because he's from Dixie.
Nixie, yeah. Yeah, I'm saying Nixon, aren't I? I am sorry, Gordon. Thank you so much. Yeah, appreciate that. Where was I? Oh, yeah. Well, the tune is a composed tune. Walter Donaldson, 1929, Kansas City. There was a really hot band that played over WDAF radio Saturday nights. And in the 30s, they made this tune a national hit. It was the Coon Sanders Orchestra. Carlton Coon and Jim Sanders were the names of the gentlemen. It was a big band and had several horns, clarinets, drums, and a fiddler. Everything you could get into the room, they recorded this with. And the way we play it today isn't like the 1929 recording, but I'll give you a little sample of it. They're very generous people. Thank you. Oh my goodness. Richard Shoemaker happens to be here, a friend of mine from Boone County. He's trying to hide, but I saw him come in. And so we're going to ask Richard to come down with his 5-string banjo and play a tune with me. One of the things I talk about in the new book, and really talk a lot about it, in the third book, thank you, it's coming. A couple of years it'll be done. We'll have a whole chapter on fiddle and banjo. And if you just read the first book, you don't get too much on the banjo, though we do talk about minstrel banjo and the evolution of various basic styles of playing and tunes. The second book, by 1920, we're into plectrum banjos and jazz and all that. But the third book, when we really get into bluegrass and the relationship of banjo and fiddle, we get into a lot more about the banjo. And I just thought it'd be fun since Richard was here. And thank you for coming, Richard, a good friend of mine, recent graduate of Truman State University. Let's hear it for Truman. And he was a violin major there, so that's why he's playing the banjo tonight. He was actually the first chair in the orchestra? He was that guy, Mark. He was that guy. Everybody had to tune up to Richard. Hard to imagine, but it happened. But lately he started playing the banjo, and what he's going to do is play what I think he called that claw hammer. He calls it claw hammer. Now, to me, that's a new term. See, I'm an old guy, so in my day, we just called it frailing. And then all these Appalachian hotshots started playing melodic stuff with it, Walt Coken and people like that, and started kind of changing the old Missouri-style banjo into more melody with the frailing lick. Everybody with me on that? How am I doing, Julie? Explain that.
Walt Coken was from St. Louis.
St. Louis, and went to MU for a year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. You just said Appalachian. So
Yeah,
it wasn't original.
but he didn't play.
Adopted that.
Yeah. But to do this properly, I was kind of hoping that Lonnie Hoppers didn't sneak in the back, did he? You all know Lonnie Hoppers? Where is he here? Oh, I didn't see you come in. Did you bring a banjo, Lonnie? Did you bring a banjo?
No, I want to see if I can learn something.
Well, stay here and you might, Lonnie. Lonnie Hoppers is one of the stars of the book, the new book, Fiddler's Dream. Even though he's a banjo player, because he represents the history of bluegrass banjo playing in a really important way. Like a lot of bluegrass players, he started out as a kid playing plectrum banjo, 4 strings, behind old-time fiddlers near Urbana, Missouri, or should I say Arbanner? I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I do, okay. Near Urbana, Missouri, and Lonnie was fortunate. His grandfather was an amazing old-time frailing banjo player, and he had banjo music all around him, but when he first got into playing banjo, it was more playing plectrum, that is sort of the 1920s style, behind his grandfather and behind local fiddlers who were playing in jam sessions and dances, but chording the banjo and not playing a lot of melody. But the great thing, as Lonnie likes to say, of playing plectrum is you learn the neck. You learn all the positions way up and down the neck. And then, like a lot of kids, he accidentally heard Earl Scruggs, and, Sonny Osborne and a few Martians like that, and decided to throw it over and become a bluegrass banjo player. And sure enough, he met Bill Monroe. Bill hired him. He recorded some important early sides with Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys, played on the Grand Ole Opry. Probably, certainly Missouri's most famous banjo player today is Lonnie Hoppers. He's sitting right back there.
Yeah, Lonnie.
Hey, Lonnie. So we're going to play a tune that Lonnie and I have played in jam sessions. One of my very favorite tunes that Lonnie plays. Of course, he plays a version of 3-finger style, so it won't be what Richard's going to play. But I thought maybe you guys should meet after this is over, and you could show the kid how the banjo's supposed to be played. Yeah. Dixie, Hoedown. We'll play it in G. We're going to try to get the right chords in there. This is a really great tune that was, I guess you'd say, composed in 1957 by the banjo player with Jim and Jesse and the Virginia Boys. And at that time, 1957, Jim and Jesse were trying to distinguish themselves in their music. You all know Jim and Jesse and the Virginia Boys. Okay. So they decided in the session, we need to invent a tune that's got a bunch of minor chords in it. Because all these hillbillies, they don't know what a minor chord is. And so sure enough, they came up with this tune, a Dixie Hoedown, that has not one, but two minor chords in it, you know. So, and it became a big hit, and everybody I know likes and plays a version of Jim and Jesse's Dixie Hoedown, and it's on the CD that comes with the book, and also Lonnie has a tune on the CD that comes with the new book also. So if you want to buy a book, Lonnie will probably autograph the CD for you right here. You know. We're supposed to sell books tonight, Lonnie. What do you think, Lonnie? Is the boy going to be all right?
He's doing good.
I think he's got it. What do you think, Lonnie?
I'm learning.
Right. That's like Yoda, you know, I'm going to learn from you. Yoda knows everything there is to know on the banjo. And that's Lonnie Hoppers. Thank you so much for coming out, Lonnie. I'm just going to keep Richard up here, if you don't mind. We have a few more tunes to do before we all rush to the book sale table. And Julie Hennigan's going to get a fiddle out and play some of a little jam session outside. And Aaron Albrecht is here from Illinois. It's good to see you, Aaron. And who else has got their fiddles with them tonight? Oh, hi, John. What are we going to play now, though? What do you think? Liverpool or your ass? What do you like to play there?
I gotta go to D.
Yeah, go to I had a debate with Gordon about whether I should play Liverpool Hornpipe, which I love to play, and it's like Gordon. Maybe you want to talk about Liverpool a little bit and how Lonnie used to play it, or Lonnie Robertson.
Well, it's in England. Now, this is what Lonnie warmed up with every time before he played.
And he warmed up with this tune.
Yep.
You all know Lonnie Robertson's music, of course. There's a whole chapter about Lonnie Robertson in the new book, and on the CD there's a pretty neat recording from a 1939 radio show where Lonnie and his partner do the hillbilly act, you know, the whole 9 yards, way before Branson was invented. But they were doing that great hillbilly comedy, and Lonnie was an amazing fiddler. I recorded him in 1975 for the Smithsonian while he was still pretty much in his, I think still in his prime playing music, 75, but he did die not too long after that. But I admired his playing a lot. Then, well, let's just try to play Liverpool Hornpipe for Lonnie Robertson's Ghost. I didn't learn the tune from Lonnie because I'd already learned it from Jake Huckelmeyer, who's they call him the left-handed Dutchman from Mocaine, Missouri, a little railroad town on the Missouri River, just across the river from Jefferson City. And he played the world's finest version of Sorry Lonnie, Lonnie Robertson. But yeah, I can't play it like Jake, but I'll play you my sample of it. Liverpool, of course, is in England, as the gentleman says over here, and it's another one of those composed tunes. It's in all the old tune books going back to 1883. It's not one of those uncredited melodies. It has a known composer and all that. Thank you very much. I think we're going to play one more tune. And so do you want a breakdown or a waltz?
Waltz.
I kind of like, wait a minute. Christensen, was that you?
Both.
Oh, yes.
Who said, who wants a breakdown?
I said, I'm sorry.
We want to vote? Want to vote on it? Vote, breakdown, put your hand up. Waltz. Thank you. We'll try to play a waltz. This is called the Waltz You Say For Me, and well, as Gordon was saying this afternoon, this was a tune that the sessions that Art Galbraith led would often end with this beautiful old waltz called the Waltz You Say For Me. And I kind of like bring things gently down to a close anyway. So.
thanks very much. We have time for a couple of questions. If anybody has any questions, I'm on the thing between you and buying these books and getting some refreshments.
All right. Q&A. How long have you been playing the fiddle?
How old are you?
I'm a big jazz fan recently, and through a group here in town, Belladonna, and then changed their name to Isabel Crane. Shameless plug for them. But through listening to KPLU, KNKX, became aware of a man named Django Reinhardt. Willie Nelson even credits Django to being one of his heroes. He and Merle Haggard have a song they did to tribute to Django and Jimmy Rogers. And since I've learned a little bit about him, I found out his reach just is so far, and I've never heard people like you when they're talking about bluegrass, and but you're talking about the fiddle music from the 20s on. I would think that some of these swing tunes, as you mentioned, do people credit Django for an influence in their...
Well, yeah, that's a great question, and yes, they do credit Django Reinhardt. It was, I'd call it gypsy jazz, the niche that he had. He played in a peculiar way that was almost impossible for the common musician to copy. But in that same period, the person I talk about a lot actually in the new book, the fiddle player, who played with Django off and on, but more with the guitarist Eddie Lang, who influenced Django Reinhardt, would be Joe Venuti, who was a jazz player of phenomenal talents and just played everything and loved playing fiddle tunes as well as everything else he played. So Joe Venuti would be if I had to pick one person that influenced swing fiddling more than any, it would be Joe Venuti. But Reinhardt, for the guitar players trying to play that gypsy jazz, it's a little different part of the spectrum, but it's a very good question. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Have you ever heard of Joe Venuti playing at the playing at
No.
Sunshine Gusto in the 70s?
No, he played it.
Yeah.
Oh.
In my mind, I've never seen
You
a sign.
probably
Joe
do.
Venuti.
You toured
I need to go see him.
constantly. Yeah.
But I didn't hear a record of that. I just in my mind I was remembering Joe Venuti at the.
Well, he's Kenny Baker credits Joe Venuti with turning him on to real playing the violin, real stuff. That says a lot right there. But his guitar player, his favorite guitar player with whom he recorded probably 178 RPMs in the 20s and early 30s, died young, Eddie Lang. And after that, he went into several years of great remorse over the loss of his recording friend, and it was only as Venuti was an older man that he sort of came back into the scene. But he was playing when he was 90 years old, and still influencing young players, and recording at an old age too. So most people, particularly Western swing fiddlers, will talk about Joe Venuti, and some bluegrass fiddlers like Baker, who are honest, who will admit out front, yeah, I play jazz and I love it. Not a lot of bluegrass players are willing to admit that. They want it to be pure water from the hills of North Carolina or something, but that ain't right, man. It all comes together somewhere along the spectrum. Other questions? Yes?
I was just wondering if you found that there have been any African influences on some of these tunes as they pass down through Appalachian via the influence of African American and black fiddlers and banjo players.
That's a pretty good, big question. Take my seminar in the 400 level seminar. We'll get to that. But actually in the first book in the chapter about African American players, I talk about black fiddlers in Missouri, and there were some famous ones who, like I said, played over the radio and were recorded by the famous collector R.P. Christensen, and his tunes are transcribed, and some of his tunes are on the web. You can on your YouTube punch in Bill Driver, and you will get some of the best, most hard-driving, hardcore old square dance fiddling you will ever hear. There's no hint of him being African American in those selections. However, I've interviewed his family members extensively around central Missouri and trying to do some more archaeology on his music. And I've thought about that question of, is there something in today's old-time fiddling that we can look at to say it's from African-American tradition? Apart from the usual stuff about the blues and the usual textbook stuff that everybody knows. And I can only find one or two things that I might suspect. And there's a gentleman over here giving me the eye named Michael Meyer who studied this a lot too. In fact, I'm sure knows a lot more about it than I do. But since I have the microphone, I'll go ahead. Don't get Michael started. We'll be here at 2 in the morning. But there is a tune called Old Jeff City that Bill Driver and Bill Caton both played and played over the radio, WOS. A lot of people learned it. And they called it Caton's Hornpipe because they heard Bill Caton play it. They didn't know he was black. The real title is Old Jeff City or Jefferson City. And it has a little section in the B part that, if anything that I've heard, sounds kind of like it might be black from dance music, two steps particularly, foxtrot playing, which he was famous for. And if you take the recordings that you hear, and this is something that Michael Meyer taught me, and thank you, Michael, is that if you take that recording and imagine it played a little bit slower, you get an amazing foxtrot. If you just listen to it the way it was recorded one time by R.P. Christensen, who was looking for breakdowns and square dance tunes, Bill Driver knew what the collector was looking for and played it for him. But my theory is if you got Bill Driver to play it a little bit slower, it would sound awful bluesy and awful like, all-night taverns and Little Dixie, and that's my theory. So if you want to hang around, we'll play that for you after this little event is over. Anybody else can add their 2 cents to that if you want to make it 2 cents. How about it, Michael? You want to add it?
It's two things. The black fiddling is two things. It's the rhythm. The rhythm is different, and the slides. I mean, there's just all kinds of slides from the blues in true black fiddling, and it comes out, and he probably just barely did a little bit of that. But if you had gotten him alone, he'd have done a lot more slides. I just feel like it.
That's a great question, one we need to work on, because with so many of our best fiddlers have been African American, and we don't know enough about them. I don't know. Maybe Art told me the last black fiddler that he knew, and it was what's his name, Bud Price. He's been dead for 50, 60 years. So. And in our part of the state where these players were still active in the World War II years, they stopped playing. And here's one for you sociological minds doing your dissertation, looking for a good topic. They stopped playing their music with white people during the Civil Rights Movement, in my opinion, because they didn't want to be thought of as Uncle Toms. And that whole tradition of black people and white people playing fiddle music together, boom, just died overnight during the 1960s. This isn't a nice, popular thing to say, but I kind of think that's what happened. Because there are plenty of their family members around who tell you it happened. Anything else?
I've got a question. It's kind of,
yes, sir.
So many fiddle players here, it's always been a puzzling question. The song Brilliancy was, I've always heard that it was a Howdy Forrester tune.
He recorded a good version of it, but it was actually recorded in 1922 by Eck Robertson for RCA Victor in New York City. So it's a real old tune. It's a conglomeration of several melodies pulled together. It's a really cool tune. Hard to play. It's got a lot of B flat in it still.
So Dr. Marshall does have many copies of his 2 books available for sale. I'll sign some. If we were McClure, we'd go out on the front porch now. We'll have to go out in the lobby here. We got some refreshments, and I guess we're going to continue on a little bit. So please join me in thanking Dr. Marshall.
Thank you all.